YCS Niagara Falls just took place over the weekend, and despite being a somewhat small event, sub 1,000 players, it was still the largest attended Canadian YCS in history, which wasn't streamed by the way, so there's no actual duel footage. Moving along, the top cut had some absolute insanity that I don't think anyone would have predicted. Most of the betting money going into the YCS was probably on Tempai, Ubel Fiendsmith, and maybe Snake Eye / Fire King as a Mina variants, which makes it all the more shocking that a mad lad by the name of Oliver Bailadu entered the event with Millennium, aka Granddad Yugi / Solomon Moto's Exodia deck, and actually ended up making the top cut of the event. This is a deck that I actually picked up and played post the Infinite Forbidden, and in general, the deck sometimes worked, but it had major consistency problems and it felt like it lacked just one more potential disruption needed to reliably seal games. As many know, that piece came in the much anticipated Heart of the Blue Eyes, which single-handedly takes the strategy from fun little rogue deck that you can probably mess around with locals with to a legitimate and competitively viable deck able to top regionals and, as the title suggests, even a YCS. Heart of the Blue Eyes drastically increases the consistency of Millennium by giving it another one-card starter that searches for the most important card in the entire deck, Millennium Ankh, which for all intents and purposes is what the entire deck revolves around. This means you now have 6 ways of getting to the key and a second card that can let you push through a potential Ash Blossom on your Millennium Shield effect. Heart of the Blue Eyes isn't just a consistency and starter card in one, however, it also gives the deck an extra piece of free potential disruption. Heart's effect from the graveyard is very similar to Promethean Princess, as it can trigger whenever your opponent summons a monster that's level 8 or higher, or one with 3,000 attack or more, so yes, it actually does cover Lynx and Xyz monsters as well. This effect sends their monster to the graveyard while also summoning your 3,000 attack one, which your opponent will now have to deal with. The disruption effect only works after you've successfully resolved the Ankh, but considering Heart's effect discards itself to the graveyard to do exactly that, unless it gets stopped, the effect is probably going to be online. One might think that this same effect being a hard once per duel could also be a bit of an issue, but because of the nature of Millennium and how it's such a one-punch deck that wants to end the duel in a single turn, it never actually matters because you're going to be killing your opponent on the crackback anyways. When I look at Oliver's specific build that took him to the top 32, I think that the deck was really well built because he didn't go hand trap crazy as what's often seen in the OCG versions, and he also didn't make the deck super die roll reliant by adding a ton of situational floodgates that can easily backfire if he has to go second. Powerhouses like Dimension Shifter can cripple most decks in the metagame outside of Ritual Beast and Tempai, but doesn't affect Exodia in any meaningful negative way. In fact, Shifter actually makes Exod Fires of Rage, one of the deck's main core disruptions, even more potent while only having a minor conflict within the deck, I guess being your Heart of the Blue Eyes not going to the graveyard for its Disruption Revival effect. One floodgate outside of Shifter that Oliver main decked was Secret Village of the Spellcasters, which yes, I understand is a going first card, but at the same time, it's highly searchable within the deck thanks to terraforming already being a mainstay and the inclusion of set rotation, which I also ran in my builds. I can personally attest to this card's power because in a format with so many powerful spell cards and players' tendency to side board breakers against this deck to try to force out Phantom's negation, this is an easy button to steal games. If just a single powerful spell in your opponent's hand is locked out by Secret Village, I'd say that you're already in a good position, let alone if they have multiple. At the same time, this 3-card engine that can instantly win games becomes an easy 3-card side out for board breakers like Evenly Match and Regeki if he happens to go second and he knows that he's going to have to play through an established field, for instance if you were dueling against maybe Ubel. Main decking 3 Triple Tactics talents also helps with this, which by the way I am a big fan of in this deck. Tactics punishes your opponents who Ash Blossom your attempts to search Ankh, while also being a much necessary go second card, which by the way, pretty much the same thing could be said about Infinite Impermanence, which he said in his deck profile he always saved when going second for his turn to try to break established boards. It seems like Victor basically tried to find a sweet spot and opted into not playing too many hand traps that are strictly for going second, hence there being no more Charmy or cards like Nibiru, Droll and Lockbird, things like that. that, while relying on the more versatile ones like the previously mentioned Infinite Impermanence and Ash Blossom and Joy Springs, cards that are just good enough going second, but can also be solid disruptions that help protect Phantom if it happens to live a turn, in which you're probably in a winning position anyways. That same type of mentality does also work for cards like Triple Tactics Talent and Pot of Prosperity. I feel like Millennium was actually a sneaky good meta call for a large event in an unestablished metagame. Not only are people still largely unfamiliar with the cards of this deck, let alone that it just got a new card in Rage of the Abyss, but with all the hype for Malcharmi Fuelos, this is an ideal pick into that card. Millennium at most is going to summon 2 cards from the extra deck in its first turn, and if Fuelos is shotgunned, you can easily skip on making the Silhouette Rabbit and just end on Phantom, thus giving your opponent no pluses from the Malcharmi. This deck, as I mentioned earlier, is pretty much immune to Dimension Shifter as the card is going to be ran in the deck itself, and it plays pretty well into Drone and Lockbird, which seem to be popular at YCS Niagara Falls. While the deck does have its initial search needed to get the Millennium Ankh, it can pretty much still do what it wants to do and get other disruptions via Phantom Exodia, Heart of the Blue Eyes, Silhouette Rabbit, and set rotation all under Waldrona Lockbird. There's also the new hit card Dominance Impulse from Rage of the Abyss, which can stop Millennium Ankh and is seeing a lot of play. It's actually worth pointing out that it's about the only hand trap in the game that actually does stop the Millennium Ankh. However, Millennium Ankh is not once per turn in any capacity, so even if they do happen to have Dominance Impulse, you can still activate another copy of the card, which is a trade that I think that I'll take. Also like going over 40 cards in the Millennium deck specifically because obviously you don't want to draw the Exodia pieces ever, and this reduces the odds of that. But at the same time, a lot of your power cards like the Shifter, Talent, Ankh, and Blue Eyes are 3-ofs. So if you're going to 42 or 43, it doesn't drastically alter the odds of seeing those cards in some real bad detrimental way, while at the same time, it reduces the odds of those auto loss hands, which is pretty much any hand that you open with 2 Exodia pieces. I do wish that the Millennium deck had at least one piece of support outside of Exod Fires of Rage that interacted with the Exodia pieces in a meaningful way, because drawing any of those 5 cards obviously feels just terrible, and it's the deck's biggest hindrance that Konami hasn't addressed. This is mainly because you basically never ever want to summon these cards. They offer little to no field presence or damage, and if you do happen to summon them, it instantly turns off cards like Millennium Ankh and Exod Blaze. Is Exodia a quote-unquote meta deck right now? Probably not. In fact, I would say it probably won't be for the remainder of this format, and it definitely isn't going to go in my top 5 meta decks right now. With that said, however, I believe that it is a competent meta deck that can compete. Huge boost to its consistency, more starters, and additional disruption, and in an environment right now in the metagame that is flooded with hand traps, it can kind of excel and be a very decent niche pick, and an engine that I would actually say is worth picking up, especially if you got about $60 to spend and you want to play a big number deck that is going to win or lose by turn 2, but maybe you've already played Tenpai. The link to Oliver's full deck profile on Pie of Life Games channel will be in the description below if you are interested in Millennium/Exodia or just want to know how it works more. I implore you to check out that video for more coverage. Thanks for watching as always.